according to lots of people, and their feeling is that more than 2 million people with a Dutch heritage around the globe have a family story with the Dutch East Indies, or the Netherlands East Indies. And of course, because of that, also to the Pacific War. And so do many here in Australia. For instance, my sister Louise, who lives here for over 50 years, and I. Now, remembering this war today by the story of my father, of, mind you, more than 80 years ago, highlights the courage, determination, and resilience of all the Dutch, Australian, British, and American forces. Those who survived and those who sadly didn't. My father's story is a template to lots of the Allied forces. So I think it's time to give you a very brief introduction to my dad, Claude. His nickname was Boy. And he was a person as strong as bamboo, but also very soft sometimes, especially regarding our family, of course, and is as soft as the chalice of a lotus flower. He was actually similar to Francis. He was born in the Dutch East Indies, in Bandung. And he lived in the tropics for over 40 years. He was in the KNIL, in KNIL, for over 7 years in total. And he was a radio operator, and he was in Cimahi, which was close to Bandung. And he was in the engineer troops and engineer forces. Now, let's delve into the condensed, horrific experience of the prisoners of war in the Dutch East Indies and Japan. So at 11:02 a.m. on the 9th of August, the US hit Nagasaki in Japan with their strongest plutonium bomb ever. That city was totally destroyed, vanished as thin air. And the fat man, that's how it was called, was dropped while hundreds of prisoners were forced to work nearby. And these POWs endured already for nearly 4 years starvation, sickness, and abuse. And once, more than once, I should say, they had faced death before seeing the sunrise again. And then Japan started using their hell ships to transport the POWs from the Dutch East Indies and elsewhere to Japan and other places in the Pacific to be used as slave laborers. And things got even more awful when thousands and thousands of POWs died in Allied attacks. And on top of this all, around 13,000 Australians were forced to work on the Burma Railway throughout 1942 and 43, among many Allied POWs and Asians. From Claude's diary, May 1944. We soon ran into a typhoon which lasted 4 days. As a result, our holds were closed for 4 days. So that means no food and hardly any drinking water. The hurricane caused damage, lots of damage to the Miyomari. That transport further to Japan was impossible. So we changed ships in Takao, in Formosa, now Taiwan. And our new ship, the Tamahoku Maru, was in the convoy that transported us, the POWs, to Japan. And in the back of the ship, there were about 500 Japanese soldiers. At night, it was pitch black in the filthy hold. Countless bodies were littering the floor in the hold. We just had one bucket, and it was inevitable that you get sick. It was just awful. We approached Nagasaki Bay, only 6 hours to go. And then it happened. A tremendous, intense, and indescribable explosion was accompanied by waves of water and falling beams. And I was buried under planks which kept me underwater, and I tried desperately to free myself. The ship sank in 2 minutes. It was a cacophony of sounds, people screaming and crying and praying Ave Maria and Our Father. The Japanese sang their war songs, and people cried in the water to get help. An escort picked up the Japanese survivors and left us, the POWs, in the ice-cold water. I've never ever felt so cold. And we were picked up the following morning by a small whaling ship, which brought 211 survivors to Nagasaki. One other survivor arrived a few days later. I was so thankful I was alive, but the image of the people crying out for help never left me. And seeing my fellow mates drowning before my eyes always stayed in my mind forever. It's a real tragedy that 560 of the 772 POWs drowned. It was a friend's hand, the US submarine tank, which sank Tamahoku Maru by a torpedo on the 24th of June, 1944. The Americans, as we know, didn't know there were POWs on these healthy ships. Fellow Dutch, Australian and British POWs were lifted into trucks to be transported to one of the 130 Allied POW camps in Japan. Their camp was Fukuoka 14, near the Mitsubishi Steel Foundry on the Urakami River in Japan. Claude's tales speak of the bravery needed to reconstruct, reinvent, reshape the very definition of strength and perseverance. And there are similar stories, also from Australian POWs. For example, Alan Chick, Bernard O'Keefe, and Peter McGrath Kerr. And they were also survivors of the Tamahoku Maori. And they were forced to work in the Mitsubishi Steel Foundry alongside Claude and other POWs. From Claude's diary, 1945, August 1945. We returned again and again to that hard-hit city to help where we could. Nothing remained except for dark imprints on charred bricks. We dug up food and we ate it. We didn't know. We didn't know the possible consequences, as we didn't know yet that it was an atomic bomb. And on the 17th of August, we were called together. And our camp commander stood on an empty barrel. And then we realized we're free. We just stood there. And then we hugged. And then we cried and just sobbed, no laughing. But we were free. 12 long hours of daily slavery had ended. 12 long hours of abuse and servitude had ended. Now, as free men, we look forward to feel like human beings again. The Nagasaki disaster was totally mind-blowing. Even though Fukuoka Camp 14 was torched, it was so close to where the bomb hit, only 1,850 meters away from the epicenter. And of the 195 surviving prisoners in Fukuoka 14, 152 were Dutch, 24 Australians, and 19 British. Peter McGrath Kerr and Bernard O'Keefe and Alan Chick were 3 of the 24 Australian survivors. As a picture speaks 1,000 words, I invite you to watch part of a documentary about the nuclear blast in Nagasaki. While Paul is looking it up for me, as we all know, if the US didn't use these atomic bombs in Japan, the Japanese wouldn't have changed their mind. Okay.
It could be loud, so I warn you.
Okay.